February 7, 1985, Guadalajara, Mexico. DEA Agent Enrique Kiki Camarena steps out of the U.S. consulate, but he never makes it to his truck. 5 men grab him off the street in broad daylight, jam a .45 into his ribs, and fold him into a black Suburban. A federal agent vanishes into afternoon traffic. His captors work for Rafael Caro Quintero, a marijuana baron who weighs his money. For 30 hours, they torture him. He gives them nothing. But here's what makes this case unlike anything in the drug war. Caro Quintero is convicted, sentenced to 40 years, then walks out at 2 a.m. on a technicality no lawyer raised for 28 years, vanishes before the U.S. Embassy is notified, and stays free for nearly a decade with a $20 million bounty on his head. No drug lord has ever killed a federal agent and escaped justice. The obvious answer is Mexican corruption. But the trail climbs into the CIA, where classified files remain sealed and points to corruption. How did the man who tortured a federal agent walk free? And what is the CIA still hiding? Late 1970s, Mexico's drug trade is fragmented, dozens of small-time traffickers killing each other over territory, no chain of command, no infrastructure. Opium poppy growers in Sinaloa sell to whoever shows up with cash. Marijuana farmers ship loads across the border in pickup trucks with no coordination and no protection. The mortality rate among independent traffickers is astronomical. That chaos ends when a former Sinaloa state police officer named Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo has a corporate idea to consolidate every major trafficker under one organization, divide Mexico into smuggling plazas, assign each plaza to a trusted lieutenant, and run the entire operation like a franchise. The concept is simple but revolutionary for the Mexican underworld, creating a system where competition is managed, violence is regulated, and everyone profits under a single umbrella. It transforms the drug trade from a chaotic free-for-all into something resembling a business conglomerate with regional managers, quarterly earnings, and a CEO. He recruits 2 partners, Ernesto Don Neto Fonseca Carrillo, a veteran trafficker with deep roots in Sonora and connections to corrupt politicians across 3 states, and a 24-year-old grower from Badiraguato, Sinaloa, named Rafael Caro Quintero, young, reckless, and already rich from marijuana sales. Together, they form the Guadalajara cartel, Mexico's first true narco conglomerate, headquartered not in some mountain hideout, but in the country's second-largest city. Felix Gallardo is the strategist, Don Neto is the diplomat, and Caro Quintero is the farmer. And his crop is marijuana, grown at a scale no one on Earth has ever attempted. His masterpiece is a plantation called Rancho Buffalo, carved into the desert flatlands of Chihuahua, roughly 200 miles south of the Texas border. What makes Buffalo different from every other marijuana operation in history is not just its size, it's the level of infrastructure and organization that resembles a legitimate agricultural business more than a clandestine criminal enterprise. Picture a field so vast it registers on satellite imagery, somewhere between 2,000 and 10,000 acres of seedless sinsemilla, tended by as many as 10,000 migrant laborers recruited from impoverished villages, irrigated by water diverted from government canals, and guarded by men carrying AK-47s. The operation is so large it functions as its own economy. Workers are housed in barracks on site, paid in cash, and provided meals. Armed guards patrol the perimeter in shifts. The plantation has its own road network, its own water infrastructure, and its own security apparatus that rivals a small military base. Conservative estimates place the street value of Buffalo's annual harvest above $8 billion. Caro Quintero did not count his money. He weighed it. Stacks of American $100 bills filled entire rooms of his Guadalajara mansion. He reportedly once offered to pay off Mexico's entire national debt, roughly $90 billion at the time, in exchange for government protection. The offer was declined, but the fact that he could make it tells you everything about the scale of his operation. That cash bought something more valuable than luxury. It bought immunity. The cartel's operating principle was simple. Everyone gets paid. Governors, police chiefs, military commanders, federal judges, all on monthly retainers. The bribes are not occasional. They are systematic, scheduled, and budgeted like payroll. Every official who accepts Caro Quintero's money becomes a stakeholder in the operation's survival, because the day the money stops, their careers and possibly their lives are over. But the cartel's most critical partnership was with Mexico's Dirección Federal de Seguridad, the DFS, the country's equivalent of the CIA and FBI combined into one agency. DFS agents did not merely look the other way. They served as Caro Quintero's personal bodyguards. Armed DFS convoys escorted drug shipments across state lines. DFS credentials opened military checkpoints. One particular DFS commander, a man named Sergio Espino Verdin, would soon become central to this story and to Kiki Camarena's worst hours alive. By 1984, the Guadalajara cartel controls smuggling corridors from the Sinaloa Mountains to the Texas border. Every major Colombian cocaine trafficker, including the Medellin cartel, trusts Felix Gallardo's network to move product into the United States. The empire is functioning, the cash is flowing, and the man quietly mapping every node of this network from a rented office in Guadalajara is a DEA agent named Enrique Camarena. Why didn't the cartel kill him the moment they identified him? And what does it say about their confidence that they waited long enough for him to map their entire empire? Camarena works fast. He is not a desk agent. He is a street operator. Born in Mexicali, raised in Calexico, California, he speaks fluent Spanish and moves through Jalisco without drawing attention. He drives back roads in a rented sedan, meets farmers in cantinas, slips $20 bills to informants, and plants surveillance devices in cartel-linked telephones. Every intercepted conversation feeds a growing map of the cartel's logistics, stash houses, airstrips, distribution points, payment schedules, and that map keeps pointing to the same name, Rafael Caro Quintero. Camarena is building something no DEA agent has built before, a complete organizational chart of the Guadalajara cartel, from street-level couriers to the men sitting at the top of the pyramid. He knows who bribes whom, which pilots fly which routes, which police commanders look the other way on which nights. The intelligence is so detailed it could dismantle the entire operation in a single coordinated raid. That level of knowledge makes him the most dangerous man in Mexico. Camarena's superiors at the DEA field office in Guadalajara warn him to slow down. The Mexican government has not authorized this level of intelligence gathering. Camarena ignores them. He is building the most comprehensive picture of the Guadalajara cartel that any law enforcement agency has ever assembled. He knows that if he stops now, the evidence dies with the operation. His colleagues understand the risk he's taking, but cannot convince him to pull back. Camarena believes the window to dismantle the cartel is closing fast, that if he doesn't act now, the organization will become so entrenched in the Mexican government that no amount of evidence will matter. Then Camarena delivers the blow that changes everything. In November 1984, acting on coordinates he pieced together from intercepted radio traffic and informant debriefings, 400 Mexican soldiers backed by DEA advisors descend on Rancho Buffalo by helicopter. They find marijuana fields stretching to the horizon in every direction. Over several days, they burn between 5,000 and 10,000 tons of product, so much that the smoke plume is visible for miles across the Chihuahua Desert. At the time, it is the largest drug seizure in recorded history. The cartel loses more wealth in 72 hours than some Central American nations generate in an entire year. The raid does not just destroy product. It humiliates the cartel in front of every corrupt official they've been paying for protection. If Caro Quintero cannot protect his own plantation, what are governors and generals being paid for? In Guadalajara, Caro Quintero absorbs the news like a man watching his kingdom burn. For years, he had boasted that he owned the army, the police, and according to claims that would surface later, even had friends inside American intelligence. Buffalo shatters that illusion. Someone fed the Americans the exact coordinates. Someone betrayed him. Caro wants to know who. The answer from every informant on the street is the same: the DEA agent, Camarena. After the raid, Camarena's world contracts fast. Unfamiliar cars tail him through Guadalajara's streets. One of his most trusted informants, a pilot who had been feeding him flight records, turns up dead in a ditch outside Zapopan. Camarena tells Mika he is being watched and asks the DEA to accelerate his transfer out of Mexico. The bureaucracy grinds slowly. Washington tells him 12 more days. He does not have 12 days. The cartel is moving faster than the paperwork. Every day Camarena stays in Guadalajara is another day the people who want him dead have to find him. On the morning of February 7th, 1985, Camarena kisses Mika goodbye, tells his 3 sons he will see them at dinner, and drives to the consulate. At 2:14 p.m., he steps outside for lunch. He never comes back. 2 DFS officers in plain clothes wave him over near his truck. 5 men grab him. He disappears. President Reagan is briefed within hours. His reaction is immediate and furious. The White House authorizes Operation Leyenda, the largest overseas homicide investigation the DEA has ever mounted. And what happens inside the room where they take Camarena is something that will be recorded on tape, preserved as evidence, and haunt every person who hears it for the rest of their lives. What happens when a cartel crosses the one line that was never supposed to be crossed? And what did they record inside that room that would haunt everyone who heard it for the rest of their lives? They drive Camarena to a house on Lope de Vega, 881, a stucco residence on a quiet residential street in the Jardins del Bosque neighborhood, less than a mile from the U.S. consulate. Inside, he is stripped to his underwear and bound to a wooden chair with an electrical cord. Rafael Caro Quintero sits across from him at a folding table. Around the room, Don Neto Fonseca, several cartel lieutenants, and Sergio Espino Verdin, the DFS commander turned cartel enforcer, a man who once carried a federal badge and now carries a cattle prod. A doctor in surgical gloves stands in the corner. His job is not to heal. His job is to keep Camarena conscious long enough to answer questions. The presence of the doctor is not mercy, it is cruelty engineered for maximum efficiency. Every time Camarena's body tries to shut down from pain or blood loss, the doctor brings him back. The torture is designed not just to extract information, but to never let unconsciousness provide an escape. For 30 hours, they interrogate him. The method is not rage. It is systematic, almost clinical. They fracture his skull with a tire iron. They crush his ribs one by one, pausing between blows to repeat their questions. They press a power drill into the side of his head. When Camarena loses consciousness, which happens repeatedly, the doctor injects him with lidocaine and amphetamines to drag him back to awareness. Through it all, cassette recorders are running on the table. Those tapes will later become the most important evidence in the case, and what they capture is a man who refuses to break. Camarena gives them nothing of operational value. He shields the names of his informants. He shields the identities of his colleagues. He endures 30 hours of methodical brutality and surrenders nothing his captors can use. When Camarena finally stops breathing, they wrap his body in plastic sheeting and drive it, along with the body of his pilot, Captain Alfredo Zavala Avalar, who had been kidnapped the same day, to a ranch outside the town of La Angostura, 60 miles southeast of Guadalajara. They bury both men in shallow graves in an open field. A month later, acting on a tip, Mexican federal police dig up the remains. The bodies are badly decomposed, but forensic evidence will later confirm every detail of what happened in that room. The blunt force trauma, the drill marks on the skull, the injection sites where the doctor administered stimulants. The cassette tapes recovered from the house preserve 30 hours of torture and audio that no jury will ever forget. The discovery detonates a crisis that reshapes the relationship between two nations. President Ronald Reagan launches Operation Leyenda, the most aggressive overseas homicide investigation in DEA history, staffed by dozens of agents pulled from postings around the world. Simultaneously, the United States all but seals the Mexican border. Customs agents at every crossing from Tijuana to Matamoros are ordered to conduct maximum intensity inspections on every vehicle and cargo container. Commercial traffic drops by as much as 90% at some ports of entry. Mexico's border economy hemorrhages millions of dollars per day. The pressure is deliberate, calculated, and unrelenting. The message from Washington requires no translation. You killed one of ours. Everything stops until we get the men who did it. If you're finding this story worth your time, subscribe, because what comes next is where it stops being a drug war story and starts becoming something far darker. Caro Quintero flees, grabs his girlfriend, $8 million in cash, and boards a private plane to Costa Rica. In April 1985, Costa Rican commandos, guided by DEA intelligence, storm his rented mansion near San Jose. Caro is arrested after a brief standoff. Extradited to Mexico, he is convicted in 1989 and sentenced to 40 years for the kidnapping and murder of Camarena. Headlines declare justice served. The DEA closes a chapter. The public moves on. But the investigators working Operation Leyenda do not move on. Because inside the evidence they have gathered, bank records, flight manifests, witness depositions, and Camarena's own field reports, a second pattern is emerging. The money trails do not stop at Guadalajara. The flight logs do not stop at the border. And the names appearing at the edges of this case do not belong to drug traffickers. They belong to intelligence officers. Who was protecting the Guadalajara cartel from the inside? And why did Kiki Camarena have to die for getting close enough to find out? The deeper Operation Leyenda digs, the harder the ground pushes back. Requests to Mexican officials for case files are delayed, then denied, then lost. Key witnesses recant their testimony. Others vanish. The obstruction is so systematic, it cannot be accidental. For the DEA agents working this case, one question keeps surfacing. What is so dangerous about the full truth? Here's what the evidence suggests. In the early 1980s, the CIA is running a covert war in Central America, funneling weapons and money to the Contra rebels fighting Nicaragua's Sandinista government. Congress has banned this aid through the Boland Amendment of 1982. The CIA needs off-the-books funding and a logistics pipeline that cannot be traced back to the United States government. The Guadalajara cartel has both billions in drug revenue and an established network of clandestine airstrips, pilots, and smuggling routes. The convergence of interests is almost too convenient. Multiple sources, including former DEA lead investigator Hector Bareles and retired DEA agent Phil Jordan, have stated that U.S. intelligence quietly partnered with the cartel's infrastructure during this period, using cartel-owned ranches as transshipment points for weapons bound for the Contras. One witness, a former cartel pilot named Werner Lotz, claimed CIA operatives were present during Camarena's interrogation, that the cassette recorders were rolling not just for the cartel's benefit, but for an American audience that needed to know exactly how much the DEA agent had uncovered. None of this has been officially confirmed. The CIA has categorically denied any involvement in the Camarena case or any partnership with the Guadalajara cartel, but what is confirmed is the pattern of suppression that followed. Agents who pursued the intelligence connection found their investigations defunded and their career trajectories flattened, while witnesses who named American officials were discredited or relocated. The scope of Operation Leyenda was progressively narrowed until it targeted only the cartel's Mexican leadership. In 2013, investigative journalist Anabel Hernandez, in her book Narcoland, cited 3 former Mexican federal officials who claimed the CIA and at least one rogue DEA officer helped plan Camarena's abduction. The U.S. Department of Justice declined to comment. The CIA issued no response. Then comes the technicality. August 9, 2013. A 3-judge panel on Mexico's First Circuit Tribunal reviews Caro Quintero's case and rules that Camarena's murder should have been tried in state court, not federal court, because Camarena held no formal diplomatic status under the Vienna Convention. On that jurisdictional distinction, the difference between state and federal venue, a technicality that no lawyer had raised during the original trial or the subsequent 28 years of appeals. Caro Quintero's 40-year conviction is vacated entirely. Not reduced, not sent back for retrial. Vacated. The prison processes his release paperwork in the middle of the night. He walks out of Puente Grande at approximately 2 a.m. No one from the U.S. Embassy is notified until hours later. By morning, Caro Quintero has vanished into the network of dirt roads and mountain villages that have sheltered Sinaloa's traffickers for generations. The U.S. reaction is immediate and furious. The DEA calls it a travesty. The State Department demands his rearrest. Mexico's Supreme Court later overturns the lower court ruling. But it is too late. The man is gone. Was this a bureaucratic blunder by three judges who failed to anticipate the consequences of their reasoning? Or was it the final move in a decades-long chess game played by people who could never afford to let Caro Quintero testify freely in open court about who his real partners were on both sides of the border? Here is what is certain. The moment Caro Quintero walked free, every unanswered question about CIA involvement in the Camarena case became permanently harder to resolve. A man who might have named names under the right pressure was suddenly beyond anyone's reach, and the classified files that could settle the matter, files that Bareles and other investigators have demanded for decades, remain sealed inside Langley to this day. So the man who tortured a DEA agent to death is now a ghost in the Sierra Madre with a $20 million bounty on his head. But the question that matters most is not whether they will catch him again. It is whether anyone in power actually wants the full story told. And the answer to that question arrives 9 years later, in the most unlikely way imaginable. For 9 years, Rafael Caro Quintero haunts the drug war like a phantom. Informants place him in remote villages scattered across the Sierra Madre Occidental. Rumors surface that he is rebuilding a trafficking network in Sinaloa's Golden Triangle. The $20 million FBI reward generates hundreds of tips that lead nowhere. Caro is in his late 60s, old by cartel standards. Instead of dying quietly in a mountain shack, he is the most wanted drug fugitive on the planet. July 15th, 2022. The village of San Simon, buried deep in the Sinaloa mountains. Pre-dawn darkness. A Mexican Navy Special Operations team moves through dense brush toward a cluster of rural structures. A Belgian Malinois named Max alerts on a blue tarp covering a low shelter between two shacks. Marines pull back the covering. Underneath, soaking wet from the rainstorm, wearing stained pajamas and clutching a thin blanket, lies Rafael Caro Quintero. He does not resist. The man who evaded the most expensive manhunt in DEA history is captured by a dog sniffing a tarp. Then, tragedy arrives. A Black Hawk helicopter carrying 14 Marines from the arrest operation crashes in mountainous terrain on its return flight. All 14 aboard die on impact. The cost of capturing one 70-year-old man in pajamas is 14 young soldiers in a burning helicopter on a mountainside. Mexico's government moves with unusual speed. In February 2025, as part of a mass transfer of 29 cartel fugitives, Caro Quintero is flown to the United States. He lands at JFK Airport in New York under heavy FBI escort. At the federal courthouse in Brooklyn, more than 100 DEA agents fill the gallery. Someone produces a pair of handcuffs that belong to Kiki Camarena, recovered from evidence storage after 4 decades, and locks them around Caro Quintero's wrists. Caro Quintero, now 72, is arraigned on federal drug trafficking and weapons charges. The murder of Camarena cannot be retried. Mexico's conviction triggers double jeopardy protections, but the killing saturates every sentence the prosecutors speak. The judge orders Caro detained without bail. Caro's attorney enters a plea of not guilty. His client sits motionless, a small man in a blue jail uniform, staring at the desk in front of him. Outside the courthouse, Camarena's family embraces. Mika Camarena, who has waited 40 years for this moment, watches from the front row. Their 3 sons stand beside her. The surface answer has arrived, and the man is in custody. But the deeper answer remains locked away. Hector Bareles, the retired DEA agent who led Operation Leyenda's field investigation, is still insisting the case was deliberately sabotaged to protect intelligence assets. The CIA's files on the Guadalajara cartel and the Camarena operation remain classified. No Freedom of Information Act request has pried them loose. The men who may have partnered with the cartel have never been named in an official proceeding. Rafael Caro Quintero will almost certainly die in an American prison cell. By every legal measure, some form of accountability has been achieved. The agent's killer is in chains. The system functioned 40 years later. But consider what that system chose not to do. It chose not to unseal the files. It chose not to pursue the intelligence connection. It chose not to ask, under oath and in open court, Why a man convicted of murdering a federal agent was released from prison at 2 in the morning on a jurisdictional technicality that 3 judges somehow discovered after 28 quiet years. The facts of the Camarena case are settled. The body, the tapes, the conviction, the capture, all accounted for. But the meaning is not settled, because somewhere between a torture room in Guadalajara and a courtroom in Brooklyn, the full truth was sealed inside a classified file cabinet in Langley, Virginia, and no one with the authority to open it has ever chosen to do so. The man is caught. The questions are not. If you want to see how a DEA agent turned classified drug programs into his own personal empire until his own informant brought him down, click here.